Okay, so I'd like to extend a welcome to the candidates at this point who have accepted our invitation to attend. It's a testament to the importance they attribute to the issue of climate change that they're here, and we thank them for taking it so seriously. I'm Ken Enderby, the President of Climate Action Burwood Canada Bay, and your host this evening. We're very pleased to be partnering this event with the Nature Conservation Council. Climate Action Burwood Canada Bay is a grassroots group based in the seat of Reid. Its aim is to educate the public about the urgency of the climate crisis and put pressure on politicians at federal, state and local level to take the necessary steps to avert this crisis. This forum is part of that process. If you'd like to join our group, you can do so via our website. The URL will be posted in the chat. So now I'd like to introduce our candidates. We have Sahar Khalili from the Fusion Party.
Hello.
In case you don't know, the Fusion Party is a merger of the Science Party, the Pirate Party, the Secular Party, the Vote Planet Party, and the Climate Change Justice Party. We also have Charles Jago from the Greens and Sally Situ from the Australian Labor Party. I also need to mention that the Liberal Party candidate, Fiona Martin, is unable to attend. She's otherwise engaged. Sadly, we've not heard from the other candidates. So the debate is between three candidates who all have active policies to deal with the climate crisis. Tonight, each candidate will be given 5 minutes to introduce themselves and to outline the policies they're taking to the federal election. Then there'll be a Q&A where you'll have the opportunity to put questions to them. Please put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can. So now I'd like to introduce Dean Newton from the Nature Conservation Council, which is co-hosting this forum tonight. Over to you, Dee.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken, and welcome to everyone. I'd just like to give you a little bit of an overview of Nature Conservation Council. Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales, thank you, I'm being spotlit, was formed more than 65 years ago. Prior to that, nature was pillaged on an industrial scale in this state. Today, NCC has nearly over 200 member groups. They form an environmental movement of thousands of people who have been working to protect nature for over 6 decades. We work with these groups spread across New South Wales to save koalas and their habitat, stop logging our native forests, replace coal-fired power stations with renewable energy, as well as protecting our precious rivers and waterways. We lobby politicians, organise submissions, and provide research as well as supporting our groups during election campaigns. It's through our member groups, their hard work, vision, tenacity, and courage that they're able to become a voice for nature. And it's through their work that we've been able to achieve some amazingly extraordinary results. Today and tonight, NCC is delighted to partner Climate Action Burwood Canada Bay in hosting this candidates forum, where candidates can state their position on taking urgent action on climate and outline their plans and policies on how they will protect our natural and human environments. Climate change is not a single issue, it's the only issue. Without a climate where we, as part of nature, can live and thrive, other issues are incidental. I want to thank the candidates and everyone for taking the time to attend tonight. And if you'd like to find out more about what NCC does and how you can help protect nature, you can go to our website. If you'd like to be part of the Climate Action Now campaign and order a climate yard sign or a bin sticker, I'll post that address in the chat. But now, just a little housekeeping before we kick off. If you haven't used Zoom before, and because there's such a number of people on, we're asking you to stay on Zoom. We've actually placed you on Zoom just to make sure that there's no noise background so that only the candidates and the host will be able to speak. If you are new to Zoom, if you're on a computer, you will find the button down with the other function buttons at the bottom of your screen. iPad users will find their function buttons by clicking at the top of their screen. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a microphone and a camera icon. Please keep your camera on so that candidates can see the number of people who are on the call, but mute your microphone. And this will show as a slash through your microphone icon. Candidates will be given a warning time when time is running out. After that, candidates will be allowed to finish their sentence before they are muted. After all the candidates have presented, there'll be a Q&A. This is your opportunity to ask a question to a specific candidate or to all the candidates. Please use the chat function to post your questions. Our team will read out the chosen questions, but please understand that not every question will be able to be read. The chat is not to be used in a disrespectful way or to attack a candidate. Prosecute the issues, not the person. If anyone does behave badly, they'll receive one warning. After that, and if they continue with the bad behaviour, they'll be removed from the forum. Use the chat function marked everyone to ask questions throughout the event and also to let us know if there's any technical problems. I'll now hand you back to Ken, who will introduce the candidates and go through the best part of the forum.
Thank you, Dee. Well, now we get to the pointy end of the evening. So I'd like to ask each of the candidates to introduce themselves and explain their party's position on climate. The order of speaking has been determined randomly. The candidates each have 5 minutes to speak. I'll give them a warning at the 4.5-minute mark. So first up is Sahar Khalili from the Fusion Party. Would you like to unmute yourself, Sahar? And you have 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I feel very privileged to be here. Being a candidate really offers the ability to be publicly visible and to be able to spread a message that's important. And so climate emergency really is the most prominent policy that we are addressing. So thank you for setting this up so we can just really have a chat and discuss it. I just want to introduce a little bit about myself personally. So I'm quite new to politics. What brought me into politics was back in the uni days, I was really, interested in, equality, anti-homophobia, all of this, but started to get a little bit disillusioned and disengaged. Decided to just live my own life. But then I think it was around 2019, just seeing, excuse me, seeing how ScoMo just didn't really seem to have that leadership and noticed the urgency of what was happening with the bushfires, which, being in Sydney and Drummoyne, I wasn't directly impacted by the fires, but I saw the soot. I saw, the warnings of not going outside and being careful if you have asthma or allergies, and people were really starting to be worried. They were starting to see that, climate change was affecting them. So from then I was like, the state of politics is not good. I'm getting involved. So I've been involved since 2020 and learned a lot, and I'm very into it. So what the Fusion Party are offering is, first thing is we have to declare a climate emergency. And by declaring that, it means that we move from, our current just business as usual, going with the motions kind of approach, and just establishing disaster operations and disaster management, just like we did with the pandemic. We need to do that with the climate emergency. I've been reading other policies as well. So because I come from a pharmacist's background, I do see the link between our health and the health of the environment. And I think that we need to make sure that we are aware of, oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second there. We have to make sure that we are aware of this impact and this connection. And so what I'd really like to urge is we drastically need to get to net zero emissions. So that means just not contributing any more CO2 by 2030. And so that means, establishing the use of renewables. So the Fusion Party, we're saying 800% renewables. That means that we are completely using renewables, so no more emissions, and we have enough to sell overseas or to hold us over when things happen like conflicts and war, which might affect our trades and things like that. So we really want Australia to be able to have the infrastructure and the manufacturing of renewables happening here, so we're not depending on overseas resources. And then as well, Australia has a lot of lithium here. So 48% of the world, 40% of the world's lithium comes from Australia. So that's another example of why we need to develop industries and the ability to refine our own resources so that we can more rapidly develop renewables here. I'm not sure if I have more time.
Yes, you do.
Okay. All right, cool.
You've still got over a minute to go.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, those are the summaries of the main points that we want to address. I guess my approach is one thing I'd really like to see to really get people on board with this is to recognize what's happening in the background with how governments are influenced by their policy making. So I've been doing some analysis of the political party donation data that's freely available on the AEC website, so the transparency.aec.gov.au. So I had a look at that, and I really was just interested to see which companies and organizations are donating to which major parties.
30 seconds. So.
And just one thing I noticed is the coalition gets a lot of donations from coal and mining industries. One of them is called Low Emissions Technology, which kind of sounds similar to their low emissions technology roadmap. So I think that's just a little bit of an example of we're not really being given the opportunity to address renewables, and we're being held on to this coal industry.
Thanks. That's exactly 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Don't forget, folks, to put questions up in chat if you have them for the candidates. So we'll call on Charles Jago from the Greens now to give his response.
Thank you, everybody. Look, I'd like to say thank you. I'm also on Wongal land, and again, recognise that this is Aboriginal land, and which has been degraded by climate change, and that is a major issue. This is a scary time. We've had the bushfires, we've had the floods. People are starting to realise, hey, climate change is really real, but the major parties are still blocking action. And just my background, I've been recently a councillor on Canberra Bay Council. I put up a motion on moving a climate emergency, which went through. So that's the kind of thing I've been working for in council. I'd like to say that, you know, we are headed now for about 3 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels. We can either decide to act because there's a catastrophe coming, or we can decide to act because it's a fantastic economic opportunity. Either way, we just need to make the changes that we need to make. In terms of Greens policy, the first thing is that we need a blanket ban on new climate projects. According to our count, there's like 114 projects out there, coal and gas and oil. We just need to stop that and then get on with a full range of changes. We need to phase out thermal coal by 2030. And that if we can get that, there's a chance we can avoid a 1.5 degree rise. I have to say this is an issue for the major parties. The Liberals and Labor seem to think we can continue using coal. Sorry, that's not a possibility, and the Ipcc, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, makes that very clear. In that phase out, we need to support mining communities and workers, and there's a huge amount we can do on reskilling and programs there. And I've got more on the actual program, but let me just stop and talk a minute about what we've got to do in government. We have this problem. We've failed to act for over 20 years, basically because our politics has gotten plugged up. It's gotten totally stuck. And we've had how many prime ministers? I think it's half a dozen. There's a whole lot of changes we need to do that. So starting with stopping donations from the resources sector, reducing the amount of money that people can donate to $1,000, and a whole string of other things to deal with lobbying and with the revolving door between ministers and their advisors and the fossil fuel industry. and an ICAC. We need an independent commission against corruption. So, and more, there's more there. So those are the range of things just in order to stop the political problems that facilitate the inability to create change. Now, in terms of electricity, if we can electrify the entire economy, then that will give us a way to approach moving to net zero. The Greens have a policy of net zero by 2035 and 75% by 2030. But I won't argue if people have got more urgent targets. It is a race. Whatever we do, we have to get on with it as rapidly as possible. The Greens have plans to promote fully electric homes and small businesses, so phasing out gas, to really promote the use of small batteries with loans and grants, and working with states to ban the implementation of gas into new housing estates. And ultimately, we've got to close down the gas industry. We're talking about methane used as a fuel, and it's a real problem. We need, in terms of the electricity industry, the way it's structured, we need a huge investment in renewables, public investment, and also the transmission to make that happen. We need, Greens have some really substantial policies
30 seconds,
on,
Charles.
on electric vehicles, land restoration, green manufacturing, and managing climate impacts, a whole lot more. It's all on, if you search for Greens platform climate, you'll see the full thing. And I'm sorry, that's more.
Well, you had 11 seconds to spare, Charles. Right, thank you very much. So we'll finally ask Sally to explain herself and Labor's position on climate. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks to the team for organising this event tonight. I'm coming to you from Wongal land, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and also want to acknowledge the deep connection that our First Nations people have to the land. And that is something that I hope to learn from them and their experience and their connection to the land. Because I think if we all could learn a little bit from them about that, we perhaps would not be in the situation that we're in now. But I do want to go through the ALP policy platform on this, but I think most of you here will be very aware of it. So I first want to really outline my personal experience and what I have come to think about when it comes to climate change. And this interest of mine dates back almost a decade. I lived in Samoa a decade ago, and it was there that I saw the very real threat of climate change. To people living in Samoa, it wasn't an existential threat that was off in the never, never. It was very real. It was very present. They were having to do things like desperately build seawalls to hold back rising sea levels. And so this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, there were no climate change deniers there, because they saw the effects of climate change. They felt it and they saw it every day. And for those who haven't been to Samoa, it is a country of breathtaking beauty, and there's a real vibrancy and natural charm to it that just makes you love the place. And I would say it's one of my favourite places to visit. So to think that if we don't act on climate, and we don't try to address what's happening, that country could be wiped off our planet is quite heartbreaking to think about. So I felt the palpable sense of the potential loss of the country when I lived there a decade ago, and a decade later I still feel it very keenly. But also we now feel the impacts of climate change much closer to home. The 2019 bushfires, and then more recently, the floods. So we know that these sorts of natural disasters are going to become more frequent and more intense. So at least now the conversation has moved on from whether or not climate change is real, and we have moved on from that debate, which I'm thankful for. And it's something that the Labor Party has always believed in. We've always wanted to act to address climate change. We are committed to a net zero emissions target by 2050, but we don't think that's sufficient in and of itself. We need to have a strong roadmap to get us there. So it's not a pie in the sky dream, a target that we just plucked out of the air. We need to have a real pathway to getting there. And so I'm really proud of the policy platform that we've got put forward at this election, because it's a clear distinction between the Labor Party and the coalition. We have targets that have been fully costed, independently modelled, and will bring down emissions. The coalition have a pamphlet that they hope will do something using unproven technology at scale. And we don't really know if they're going to hit their emissions targets. And in fact, their commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 is starting to come undone now. We had an LNP candidate say that there was wiggle room, and we had Matt Canavan earlier today say that the ideals of a net zero emissions by 2050 are now dead. So
30 seconds, Sally.
That is the coalition, and that is what they think about action on climate change. I was going to go through and outline some of our key pillars, but what I might do is put that in the chat. I do want to say though, we really see acting on climate change as an opportunity to be creating jobs. And that is going to be the real difference. We want to bring down emissions, we want to create jobs, and we're going to bring down electricity prices.
Yeah, that's it, Sally. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for those three. I see we're getting quite a few questions coming up in the chat, which is great. So we'll now take questions from the audience. The candidates are going to be given just a minute and a half to respond to each question. That way we hope to get through as many questions as we can. Our aim is to ask one question from the audience or question on notice on each of the major aspects of climate policy in Australia, although that will entirely depend on what you are asking. So could the candidates please unmute yourselves before speaking? The questions are going to be asked by Billy Ayling, who was the Secretary of Climate Action there at Canada Bay. So over to you, Billy, to ask the first question of Sahar. You're on mute, Billy. Billy, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll just go back just a second. Oh dear, I'm having trouble here. Getting back to it, here we go.
Sean, do you have the questions there?
Hang on, let me see if does that work?
I do.
Does that work?
Sean, can you ask the first question?
Yes, certainly I can. We have a question from Corinne that's come up in the chat. If you were successful in winning the election, will you advocate for your party to bring forward its net zero emissions target from 2050 to render it compatible with the Ipcc's goal of restricting temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Well, I think we know Sahar's answer to this, but we'll hear it anyway.
Yes, so simply yes. I want to use most of my time. So from what I've been seeing, we pretty much only have 3 years from their latest predictions to stay at 1.5 degrees. So we need to rapidly transition. And one thing that I think we could offer is the $11.6 billion that was funded public taxpayer money to the fossil fuel industries, which already have enough money and they're quite rich. take that away from those fossil fuel companies and invest that in transitioning industry. So I work in change management, and I see the value of educating people and also reskilling people. Because I think what I've noticed, I've worked in Middlemount before as a scientist. Sorry, it's a little bit noisy. Anyone else getting that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I worked in Middlemount in Queensland. It's known as a mining town, as a pharmacist in 2013. And I just, observed a bit about the community there. But that's the town that's been placed there for the purposes of that mining industry. And I can see their concerns with having mining and coal be removed. So I think to address that, we need to support them when we transition those industries. So we'll divert that funding that's already being sent to those companies and educate them and reskill them towards renewables.
10 seconds.
Once we have renewables, electricity will be plentiful, clean, and cheap. We won't be worried about Earth hour and things like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Charles, would you like to give an answer?
Yes, thank you. So as mentioned, the Greens have a target of net zero by 2035 and 75% of that by 2030. We'd like to do it faster, and as far as we're concerned, it's a race, and we will make it as fast as we possibly can. So that's the core of it, and I'll stop there.
Okay, and that's certainly a fast answer. Sally, would you like to respond?
Yeah, happy to. So I think the decarbonisation of the global economy is going to be the greatest economic transformation that we will see since the Industrial Revolution. This is going to happen, but we need to bring people with us. So the concern I have is when we were first talking about addressing climate change and the proposal for an emissions trading scheme almost 15 years ago, we allowed the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And so at that time, the Labor Party proposed an emissions trading scheme, but other parties did not support it and voted against it. We then went through 15 years of inaction on climate change. So my point is, we need to make sure that we bring the whole society along with us, and we need to do it in a way where people can understand where their jobs are going to come from. It's not enough to say, we've got this huge, ambitious target, not quite sure how we're going to get there, but you can reskill and there's going to be new jobs for you in the new
10
economy.
seconds, Sally.
That's not enough. We need to offer people a real idea of the sort of jobs that are going to be available for them, but we need to bring them with us on the journey and make sure that these are achievable targets.
Thank you. Okay, Billy, are you ready to ask the next question?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I couldn't get it off mute. I think you muted me.
No, it wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you. This is a question from Tyrone. The Ipcc says that energy systems powered predominantly by renewables will be increasingly viable over the coming decades, but it will remain more challenging to supply the entire energy system with renewable energy, and therefore other technologies such as nuclear energy will be needed. What are the candidates' position on nuclear energy or the need for other technologies as outlined by the IPC, such as carbon capture and storage?
Sahar, would you like to respond to that?
Hello, yes. So I came from the Science Party before we formed Fusion, and it was one of Science's policies to embrace nuclear as an option. And I'm wary of talking about that because I know about just the decades-long, I guess, fear of nuclear. Even I initially was just thinking, I don't want to go down that road. We've heard about Fukushima, Chernobyl. I mean, it's scary. But I think what's really limiting Australia to approach that is there's a legislation that's currently banning being able to just have nuclear reactors in Australia. The thing is, we already have a nuclear facility that supplies radioactive material for medicine, and that is absolutely essential. Can't get rid of it. So if we already have that capacity of being able to deal with nuclear materials, we need to lift the ban on the legislation that came in 1999 that just doesn't let us even think about it or research it or develop ways to use it safely. Because the thing is, it's the fastest way to just have renewable energies without working too hard for it. Just another thing, the Fusion Party, we are a big fan of universal basic income. So there will come a point where
10 seconds.
A lot of jobs will get automated. And so a lot of that money that's not being made by people can just be given back to the people to enjoy.
Okay, thanks, Sahar. So Fusion's in favour of fission. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, I was a comedy writer once. Not that you'd know it. Okay, Charles, would you like to respond to that?
Okay, thank you. Look, in some countries where they have functioning nuclear, you could make the argument to continue it in some ways. But in Australia, nuclear is irrelevant. And in fact, lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry are trying to promote it as a distraction. The reality is that the nuclear industry through most of the world is going bankrupt. And if you decided to build nuclear in Australia, it would take you 15 to 20 years before you actually started producing energy out of it. So it's a wild goose chase. It goes nowhere. And besides that, it's incredibly expensive. And not only that, the people who study this say, sorry?
Sorry, it was an interruption. I don't know what that was.
Oh, sorry.
James, can you ensure everybody's muted, please?
The people who study this say that Australia's electricity grid can handle renewables. We need lots of renewables plus storage. We don't need nuclear. We're quite capable of moving to 100% renewables as long as we have storage. So forget nuclear, think about something else.
Okay, thanks, Charles. I was going to give you a bit of extra time because of the interruption, but you didn't need it. Okay, Sally, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I agree with Charles on this one. We don't need nuclear for two key reasons. One is that we will have the renewable energy capability to be able to shift off fossil fuels. And like Charles said, we just need the storage capability. The other point is that nuclear, like Charles said, is incredibly expensive. So currently it's 4 times the cost of renewables, and the timeline for getting nuclear power up is quite significant. So it just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, there you go. That was 37 seconds, Sally. That's a record. Okay, thank you very much. Billy, are you ready to ask the next question?
And none of the candidates then touched on carbon capture and storage, but I think we should leave that and return to it only if we have a bit of time later. The next one is from Richard. How will your party work through a potential hung parliament in the lower house to further your climate change policies? And what are your preferences for voting in the Senate?
All right, Sahar, would you like to start?
Sure. I think having a hung parliament, the term for that has a bit of stigma due to, Whitlam 1975. But I think it presents a really good opportunity just for diversity of ideas and conversation. And then it actually allows people to consult with their communities and then to be able to debate what is a viable idea for the future. So I will take full opportunity of that. In my role, I'm a business analyst. So I work in a lot of digital transformation projects, which means even when you're introducing a good enhancement or a new change. Oh, hello.
What?
So when you're introducing a new change, like for example, I was working in medical records, just you have to go through a lot of education just to convince people that it is a good change. So I think I will be doing a lot of that. And for the Senate, I'm sorry, I think I'm not a Senate candidate, so I haven't got that visibility, but I will get back to you, I promise.
Okay, thanks. Charles, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. Can I just say, first up, carbon capture and storage mostly doesn't work and is mostly irrelevant. On to the hung parliament question. So there are broadly three outcomes for the election. Number one outcome, the government might be re-elected. That's a horrible thought. Number two outcome, there might be a Labor landslide. Number three outcome, which I think is the preferable one, is to have a minority government. And the reason is that when you have a minority government, that government actually has to negotiate. We saw in the Gillard government, that is what happened. We got some good outcomes. We saw something like 3 months ago, Labor supported a Liberal program to put taxpayers' money into fracking in the Northern Territory. $50 million, I think it might have been even more, was put into fracking. They did that because they could. If Labor is elected in the landslide, that's what we can expect. But if there's a
10 seconds.
If they're in minority government, they will have to negotiate. And that is exactly what we all should be looking for. So that means please vote Green.
Okay, thanks.
And we will do that job. In
That's
terms
your
of
time.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Sally, would you like to respond?
I think ultimately what we want to do is get rid of the current government. Anyone but Scott Morrison at this stage is what I'd like to see. So whatever flavour that takes, I'm happy to take it. And the Labor Party certainly has history of negotiating well with other parties and independents. We demonstrated that we can be very effective when it comes to negotiating with different groups. So at this point, I'd just be happy with anyone except the coalition being in government.
Okay, thank you. Billy, have you got the next question?
Yes. This one is from Anna. Roads like WestConnex have cut a scar through our communities because the dominant thinking is that everyone should use a private car rather than supporting public transport, or better yet, bike lanes. Riding bikes for transport is the most flexible and efficient way to get around, and cargo electric bikes mean kids, groceries, pets, even fridges can get around. Even if we switch all cars to electric over the next decade, we will shoot past our 1.5 degrees increase and even the 2-degree target. Will you commit to pushing for better public and healthy active transport and not more roads? We need safe streets so kids can walk and ride to school and our whole community can be healthy.
Okay, Sahar, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, great question. Thanks for asking this. So there's a few things we could do. We need to electrify our public transport. So I do see that New South Wales State is improving the number of electric buses available, but not quickly or rapidly enough. So that needs to happen. The other thing is we need to improve our internet connectivity. So sounds a bit to the side, but the reason for that is having that means that we can improve. Sorry, it's very noisy now.
Yeah,
it's distracting me.
Not sure why.
I think Billy's on, not
James,
unmuted.
yeah, Billy, perhaps you can mute it. Okay. No, that hasn't solved the problem. James, sorry, I'm just going to halt this for a second. James, can you ensure that everybody is muted apart from the speaker?
I think the problem's solved, Dad.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I do want to have my time to say my answer.
Yeah, no, I've stopped the clock, so.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Yeah, so we need to also improve our internet connectivity. So, I think a lot of us have noticed over this pandemic that sometimes our internet isn't the best. And we are now being exposed to a new type of lifestyle opportunity of being able to work remotely. So there's less of a need to transport. So I think if we can support things like that, being able to work where we are and have better connectivity to outside of metro areas and rural Australia, I feel bad that rural and remote Australia really gets left out of the conversation, and they need to be better connected to us and save that type of travel and transport. The other thing is just as well supporting higher density living. So I think what we need to bring back is just more hubs of communities where people can really feel connected with each other and not need to travel anywhere else. So density, internet, and electric public transport.
Yep, thanks, Sahar. Charles?
Thank you. This is a great question. Look, the federal government is putting 80% of its transport money into roads, and that is a major problem. The Greens plan is to put $25 billion into rail and bus services and $500 million a year into cycling and walking. Also, the electric buses previously mentioned, the Greens have a plan for high-speed rail from Melbourne through to Brisbane and getting a lot of freight onto train networks. The thing is, it's just not a problem for the federal government. It has to be done at every level, and council has been doing this. It really requires a huge coordinated effort in order to make it possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Charles. Sally?
Yeah, absolutely agree with the question here. I think it's a multi-pronged approach though. So obviously having more bike lanes and people getting out and about cycling is fantastic. And I'm really lucky to live in Homebush where there are some fantastic cycleways near me. So I can pretty much ride from Homebush through to Parramatta all on cycleway. And that's a great tribute to the work that the councils have done. And they've done a brilliant job doing that. So connecting up our existing cycleways, I think, is very important. But I think it does need to be about public transport. And we have announced fast rail from Newcastle to Sydney. And there is no bigger proponent for fast rail than Anthony Albanese. It's something that he has been talking about, I think, for decades, ever since he was Minister for Infrastructure. I think, though, that it is important that we think about electric vehicles in this mix, because ultimately people will need to use their cars for whatever reason. But electric vehicles give us an opportunity to bring down emissions, and the Labor Party has a very strong electric vehicle policy to make them cheaper.
All right, thanks, Sally. Next question, Billy.
Right, just a moment. This one is from Madeline. If elected, will you or your party rule out any new subsidies for fossil fuel projects? What will you do to agitate for this within your party?
Okay, Sahar.
Amazing suggestion, thank you. Absolutely have to cut this public funding to the fossil fuel companies. They earn enough and they're not contributing back to the future sustainability of our environment and our health. So it's just, I feel they're just reaping the benefits of selling and digging coal out of the ground and not giving anything back. So no more funding for coal. The next thing is, as we divert that funding away from coal and put it towards renewable industries, because we'll have this clean, cheap, plentiful electricity available, it will be a complete shift in our lifestyles that we're not even used to or can even comprehend. You know, we're used to turning off our lights when not in the room and earth hour and things like that. When we have clean, plentiful, cheap electricity, we don't even have to worry about that anymore. We don't have to worry about bills or turning things off. And so we'll have plentiful energy to boost productivity in our industries and just generally have more, you know, improvements and advances in technology. We'll have people being able to have other contributions in industry. So anyway, just think about that. Free, cheap, plentiful energy. How amazing would that be?
Thank you. Charles.
I think Charles has answered that question, hasn't he?
No.
Yes, I commented on that. We need to stop those subsidies. It is about $10 billion a year. The thing is, to deal with climate, we have to transition our entire economy. So at every point, when you look at the fuel sources, the structure of each industry, in each sector in the economy, you have to look at what's powering it and how you're going to change that. And these subsidies are entrenched. So it's not simply a matter of looking at the budget, although we do need to look at the budget. It's a matter of looking at the entire transition plan to the economy. And the Greens have really done that homework. And I might mention the first thing the Greens want to do in power, if we have some influence and balance of power, is to basically ensure that we stop all new projects. Now, there's a lot of operational subsidies as well, like the diesel, what's it called? The diesel.
A rebate, I think it is.
There we go, the diesel rebate, there we go. So that's an operational thing, but there's huge amounts of subsidies across the board, and we intend to go after them all.
10 seconds. Oh, you're finished. Good.
Okay.
Okay.
There is
Sally.
one. Oh. Hasn't Sally just answered this
Sally?
question?
No, Sally's got to answer this one yet.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sally.
So the Labor Party believes that government should work with markets to reduce emissions and to create jobs and to build national wealth. And that's ultimately where we need to be moving things. Less government intervention and making sure that we put the settings in place so that our big emitters are encouraged to reduce their emissions. And that's why we have in place the safeguard mechanism, which is what the coalition had designed but failed to implement properly. And that is a system to really encourage emitters to bring down their emissions, the top 215 biggest emitters to bring down their emissions. And we believe that is where government needs to really play a big role.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Billy.
Yes, there was a later question from Richard about really about this specific topic.
Mm-hmm.
And his concern was about whether the parties would stop tax deductibility for money spent in fossil fuel development or associated transport and so forth. But I think we've probably covered that subject enough, unless there's anybody wants to say specifically whether they have in mind stopping tax deductions for fossil fuel companies.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another question?
Yes, I do. Nicole has asked, it has suggested it would be good to get a better understanding of why fusion was established and why the Greens Party policy platform was not sufficient for the Fusion Party founders. What are the key differences between the major fusion policy platform and that of the Greens? Is the Fusion Party an unfortunate splintering of what is essentially the Green vote?
Mm-hmm. Well, Sahar, would you like to answer that?
Sure thing. So the genesis of Fusion was really in response to a bill, an act that came in with full support from the Coalition and the caucus to lift the membership requirements for a party to be registered. So they tripled the membership requirements. So the Science Party was pretty confident with their number of members, but we took this opportunity to expand and collaborate and found some other parties that we were well aligned with and formed Big Fusion. The reason why we didn't go into Greens is, I mean, we've been asked this question a lot, and I find it interesting because I do like the Greens. Of course, well, I guess some people don't, but I think who couldn't, you know? But we do have some points of differences. So for example, we do have an openness to explore safer and efficient uses of nuclear power. Fusion, for example. Fission is expensive and potentially dangerous, but fusion is the future that is really worth researching in. So that's one point of difference. The other thing is, so we have expanded, so we have visibility and opinions on things like cryptocurrency. So we have more of a you know, digital slant that comes from the pirates. Yeah, so we do have differences, and I think it's kind of narrow-minded to think that you can't have multiple lefty parties. Why don't we ask that about the Lib Dems and UAP?
Thank you. All right, Charles, do you want to explain how you're different?
Thank you. I think the key thing about the Greens is that we are incredibly member driven. So many times the Liberal Party and even the Labor Party, you'll find that policy gets released as a press release from a minister's office, whereas in the Greens, all of these things are created by members, and we actually do have an incredible diversity of policies, including nuclear and a whole string of things that you won't hear about, and it's really an amazing thing because we are committed to grassroots democracy. When you see 150 people in a room having a discussion about policy, it's an amazing, sometimes a scary thing to watch. So we take that very seriously, and that's why we have the depth and diversity on everything that we do.
Could I just that also pertains to a question by Tyrone, which is to the Greens, directed to the Greens Party.
This will have to be the last question, I think.
Oh, that's a pity.
Well, it's almost 25 past, and we want to finish at 7:30.
Yep, sure. If the Greens hold the balance of power, or in the event of a hung parliament, will you, the Greens, work cooperatively and in the interests of the broader community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In that situation, we will take every issue on its merits. We have our, Greens politicians act in response to the policies of the entire Greens Party, but that is exactly the point, to do it for the broader community. And just having a balance of power situation means that then you have a negotiation where, and you'll see Greens, Independents, whoever is in that balance of power, to actually get an outcome that responds to community concern.
Okay, thank you. Well, given that it's 25 past, I think that we are going to need to draw it to a close. So I'd like to conclude by thanking everyone for attending tonight. Unfortunately, it's clear that there were quite a few people who didn't get the URL to attend because the number of people who registered was very much higher than the number of people we wound up getting. We are apologetic for that.
Margaret didn't get it. And a lot
in particular, I'd like to thank the candidates for taking time out from their busy schedules. And a massive thanks to our co-host, Nature Conservation Council, whose encouragement and support has made this event possible. Can we mute those, James, who are unmuted? Thank you. I'd like to also put out a call for people to help Climate Action Burwood Canada Bay on election day and at pre-polling. We're hoping to have a presence at all the major booths in the electorate and at as many smaller ones as we can manage. We'll be handing out how to vote cards, which, not surprisingly, will call on voters to give their top 3 preferences in no particular order to the candidates who are here tonight. In the Senate, we're asking them to preference the 7 parties with strong policies on climate, again, in no particular order. Reid is a marginal seat, so your vote and your help can help affect the outcome of the election. Please go to the link in the chat if you'd like to assist us on polling day or pre-polling. You'll also find this on our website, climateactionbcb.org. I'd like to close on a positive note. Now, while it's true that climate change is presenting the world with an existential crisis, I think everybody here agrees with that, but we cannot submit to doomism. That is the belief that it's too late to act. This is most certainly not the case. The Ipcc estimates that if every nation brought forward its decarbonisation plan by 10 years, we would get to net zero emissions by 2050. This is not an impossible ask. Better still, the scientific consensus is that once we reach net zero, temperatures will stabilise within 3 to 5 years. Then the biosphere will start drawing down CO2 and we'll see a fall in temperatures. It's not too late to save ourselves. That's the message we need to get out, but we need to get it out now and act now. If we delay much longer, it will be too late. We can't afford another 3 years of inaction like the last 9. We are on the right side of history when it comes to this issue. Everybody knows we need to decarbonise. The scientists know, the economists know, business people increasingly know, and most importantly, the public knows. What we need is politicians who know and are willing to do something to put things right. Forums like this give us hope that such politicians do exist. Now what we've got to do is get them into office. So that ends tonight's proceedings. Don't forget, if you want to help us during the election campaign, please click on the link in the chat or go to our website. We need every single person we can get to turn the things around. So good night, everybody, and thanks very much for coming.